A struggling janitor sat on the same broken chair for years, until a stranger noticed something shocking hidden inside. What they found would change everything. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The Invisible Man. The bell rang at Lincoln High, signaling the end of another long school day. Lockers slammed. Sneakers squeaked against linoleum, and laughter echoed to the halls as students rushed toward freedom. But for Ezekiel Zeke Carter, the janitor who had spent the last 23 years keeping those same halls clean, the work was just beginning. He moved slowly, his knees aching from decades of bending and scrubbing. His uniform, a faded blue shirt with his name stitched in peeling letters, hung loosely on his thin frame. The students barely noticed him, just another ghost in the background, pushing his mop bucket, wiping away the messes they left behind. Zeke's only refuge was a battered wooden chair tucked in the corner of the janitor's closet. It was old, older than some of the teachers', with duct tape wrapped around one wobbly leg, and a seat so worn the padding had flattened into nothing. But to Zeke, it was his throne, the one place he could sit for 5 minutes, close his eyes, and remember his late wife, Maria, before the next mess demanded his attention. Today, though, the chair wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a joke. "Yo, check it out," sneered Jason Miller, a senior with a smirk that never meant anything good. He kicked the chair's weak leg, making it shudder. This thing's held together by, what, hopes and prayers. His friends laughed. One of them, a girl with bright pink nails, wrinkled her nose. "EW, does it smell like bleach and sadness?" Zeke said nothing. He just tightened his grip on his mop and waited for them to leave. It wasn't the first time. Kids made fun of the chair, of his worn-out shoes, of the way he limped after a long shift. Teachers weren't much better. Some barely acknowledged him unless they needed a spill cleaned up. Even the principal, a man who gave speeches about respect and community, walked past Zeke every morning without so much as a nod. But today was different. Because today, Richard Kensington was visiting. Richard Kensington wasn't just any guest. He was Lincoln High's most famous alumnus, a self-made millionaire who had donated enough money to get the library named after him. He wore tailored suits, drove a car worth more than the teachers' yearly salaries, and had a smile that made people feel important just because he was looking at them. The school had been preparing for his visit for weeks. Fresh paint, polished floors, even a new sign out front. And now, as Richard strolled down the hallway with the principal gushing beside him, Zeke did what he always did. He faded into the background until the chair caught Richard's eye. Zeke had just sat down for his usual 5-minute break when Richard paused mid-sentence, his sharp gaze locking onto the battered piece of furniture. "Is that—" Richard murmured, stepping closer. Zeke stiffened. Was he in trouble for sitting down? For taking up space? He started to stand, but Richard held up a hand. "Wait." The principal frowned. "Richard, we have the new auditorium to show you." But Richard wasn't listening. He crouched in front of the chair, fingers brushing against the duct tape. His breath hitched. Zeke's pulse pounded in his ears. Why was this rich man staring at his broken chair like it was some kind of treasure? Then Richard peeled back the tape just a little and froze. Because underneath, barely visible beneath years of grime, was a tiny, intricate engraving, a rose. And Zeke knew, deep in his bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. The chair's hidden past. The air in the janitor's closet felt suddenly too thick, too still. Zeke's fingers twitched at his sides as Richard Kensington traced the engraving with the tip of his finger, his expensive cufflink glinting under flickering fluorescent light. "This symbol," Richard murmured, more to himself than to Zeke or the confused principal beside him. His voice was low, almost reverent. "Where did you get this chair?" Zeke swallowed. His throat was dry. It was here when I started. Belonged to the old custodian before me. He left it behind when he retired." Richard's sharp eyes snapped up to meet Zeke's. "Did he say anything about it?" A memory flickered in the back of Zeke's mind. The old man, Franklin Boyd, had been bent with age, his hands gnarled from decades of work. On his last day, he gripped Zeke's shoulder with surprising strength and said, Don't ever let him take that chair from you. It's got history. At the time, Zeke had thought he was just being sentimental. Now, he wasn't so sure. But before Zeke could answer, the principal cut in. Richard, really, it's just an old piece of furniture. We have so much more to show you. Richard straightened abruptly, his polished demeanor slipping just enough to reveal something hungry beneath. I'd like to buy this chair. Silence. Zeke blinked. You what? $500. Right now. Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. The principal's mouth fell open. The mop bucket beside Zeke suddenly seemed louder, the drip of water hitting the floor like a ticking clock. Zeke's instinct screamed at him. Something's wrong. I don't know, Zeke said slowly. It's just a chair. Why would you? Sentimental value, Richard interrupted smoothly, flashing that practiced smile. I had one like it as a boy. Humor me? A lie. Zeke could feel it in his bones. But the principal was already nodding eagerly, as if this were a perfectly normal thing for a millionaire to do. Zeke hesitated. $500 was more than he made in a week. It could mean new shoes, a decent meal that wasn't from a Deniken, maybe even a visit to the doctor for the cough that hadn't gone away all winter. But Franklin's warning echoed in his mind. Don't let him take it. I think I'll keep it, Zeke said quietly. Richard's smile didn't waver, but something in his eyes turned cold. 600. The principal made a strangled noise. Zeke shook his head. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Richard chuckled, slipping his wallet back into his pocket. Well, can't blame a man for trying. He clapped the principal on the shoulder. Shall we continue the tour? As they walked away, Richard glanced back once, his gaze lingering on the chair. No, on the engraving. Before the door swung shut behind him, Zeke exhaled, his hands trembling. He knelt beside the chair, running his fingers over the rose. It was small, barely the size of a quarter, but the detail was intricate. Petals so finely carved they looked soft. Were you? Later that night, the school was empty, the halls dark except for the pale glow of exit signs. Zeke had stayed late, his mind too restless to go home. He'd tried to research the symbol on the school's ancient computer, but the internet was slow, and he didn't even know what to search. A rose engraving? A stolen chair? Frustrated, he'd finally given up and started his usual routine. Sweeping, mopping, taking out the trash. But his eyes kept drifting back to the chair. Then, as he lifted it to sweep beneath it, he felt it. A slight shift in weight, a faint rattle, like something inside was loose. Heart pounding, he turned the chair over. The underside was scratched and worn, but there, near one of the legs, was a thin, almost invisible seam, a compartment. Zeke's fingers fumbled as he pressed along the edge. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, a small panel slid open. Inside was a folded piece of yellow newspaper and a tiny velvet pouch. The newspaper clipping was brittle with age, the headline screaming in bold, faded letters. $50 million in diamonds stolen in daring heist. Police baffled. The date? March 15th, 1982. Hands shaking, Zeke unfolded the pouch and nearly dropped it. Nestled inside was a single, dazzling pink diamond, larger than a marble, catching the dim light and scattering it into 1,000 fiery sparks across the walls. And etched into its surface was the same rose from the chair. Zeke's breath left him in a rush. Franklin's words came back, louder this time. It's got history. And now so did Zeke. The truth unfolds. Zeke sat frozen on the floor of the janitor's closet, the diamond cradled in his calloused palm like a stolen star. His mind raced, flipping between disbelief and a strange, creeping dread. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. The velvet pouch lay discarded beside him, its faded embroidery catching his eye, initials stitched in threadbare gold. R.K. Richard Kensington. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. That wasn't just a coincidence. The way Richard had looked at the chair, the hunger in his eyes when he'd offered money, he'd known. A noise from the hallway made Zeke jerk upright, his heart hammering against his ribs. He fumbled to stuff the diamond back into its hiding place, his fingers slipping with sweat. The panel clicked shut just as the janitor's closet door creaked open. "Zeke, you still here?" It was Ms. Alvarez, the night shift security guard. She leaned in, her flashlight beam cutting through the dark. "Yeah, just finishing up," Zeke managed, shoving the chair back into place with his foot. His voice sounded too high, too shaky. Ms. Alvarez frowned. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Zeke forced a laugh. "Long day." She studied him for a moment longer before shrugging. "Well, don't stay too late. Storm's coming in." As soon as the door closed behind her, Zeke slumped against the wall, his legs weak. He needed to think, needed to figure out what the hell to do next. But first, he needed to know exactly what he'd found. An hour later, the rain had started by the time Zeke reached Old Man Rafferty's antique shop, a cramped little storefront on the wrong side of town. Rafferty had been around forever. If anyone knew about stolen diamonds and old secrets, it was him. The bell above the door jingled as Zeke stepped inside, the smell of polish and dust thick in the air. Rafferty peered over his glasses from behind the counter. "Well, Ezekiel Carter. Ain't seen you since you was knee-high." Zeke hesitated. He'd known Rafferty since he was a kid, but trust didn't come easy these days. Still, he had no one else to turn to. "I need your help with something," Zeke said, lowering his voice. "Something valuable." Rafferty's bushy eyebrows shot up. "That's so." Zeke reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet pouch. He didn't take the diamond out, not yet, just set the pouch on the counter between them. Rafferty's fingers, gnarled with arthritis, unfolded the fabric with surprising gentleness. Then he stilled. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Doesn't matter," Zeke said. "Just tell me what it is." Rafferty exhaled sharply and reached for a magnifying glass. With careful hands, he lifted the diamond into the light. The moment the stone caught the glow of the overhead lamp, the entire room seemed to shift. The diamond wasn't just pink. It was a deep, hypnotic rose, pulsing with an inner fire that threw prismatic sparks across the walls. Rafferty's hands trembled. "Jesus wept," he breathed. "This is the rose of Angola." Zeke's stomach dropped. "The what?" "One of 12 diamonds stolen from the Luanda Museum in '82. Never recovered." Rafferty's eyes locked onto Zeke's. "This right here? It's worth more than this town." The words hung between them, heavy as a death sentence. Zeke's mouth went dry. "How much more?" Rafferty let out a shaky laugh. "Son, you're holding $300 million in your hand." The world tilted. Zeke grabbed the counter to steady himself. 300 million. It was an impossible number, a number that could rewrite his entire life. But Rafferty wasn't done. "And if I recognize it," he said slowly, "you can bet Richard Kensington did too." Zeke's blood ran cold, because suddenly it all made sense. Richard's urgency, his lies, the way he'd looked at that chair like it held the key to something. The initials on the pouch. RK. Richard Kensington hadn't just known about the diamond. He'd been part of the heist. A dangerous inheritance. The rain hammered against the windows of Rafferty's shop, like a warning. Zeke's hands wouldn't stop shaking. $300 million. The number echoed in his skull, too big to comprehend. He could buy a house, 100 houses. He could disappear and never scrub another floor again. But then Rafferty said the words that snapped him back to reality. "They'll kill you for this." The old man's voice was gravelly, his eyes sharp under the dim light of the shop. He slid the diamond back into its pouch and pushed it toward Zeke like it was a live grenade. "Who's they?" Zeke asked, though he already knew. Rafferty leaned in. "The Kensington family didn't get rich selling lemonade, boy." Richard's father, William Kensington, was tied to that heist back in '82. Never proven, of course, but folks whispered. He tapped the pouch. "And this is proof." Zeke's stomach twisted. Richard hadn't just wanted the chair for sentimental reasons. He'd been covering his tracks. "You need to get rid of it," Rafferty said. "Fast." "How?" "Sell it. Hide it. Hell, throw it in the river if you have to. But don't let them know you have it." Zeke's fingers closed around the pouch. The diamond inside felt heavier now, like it was dragging him down into deep water. That night, Zeke's apartment was small, a single room with a stove that barely worked and a mattress on the floor. He'd never cared before, but now, as he locked the door behind him and shoved a chair under the knob, the walls felt too thin, the shadows too long. He pulled out the diamond and stared at it in the dim glow of the streetlight outside his window. $300 million. Enough to change everything. But at what cost? A noise from the hallway made him freeze. A creak, then another. Footsteps. Too slow, too deliberate. Zeke's pulse roared in his ears. He shoved the diamond into the pocket of his jacket and grabbed the only weapon he had, a rusted tire iron he kept under the sink. The doorknob rattled. Then silence. Zeke didn't breathe. A slip of paper slid under the door. He waited until the footsteps faded before picking it up. The words were typed impersonal. You have something that belongs to us. Give it back, and we'll forget you ever touched it. Keep it, and we'll take it anyway. No signature. No name. But Zeke didn't need one. Richard knew. The next morning, Zeke didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his mattress, the tire iron across his knees, staring at the door until dawn crept through the window. He needed a plan. Option 1, sell the diamond. But who could he trust? Rafferty had made it clear. No legitimate buyer would touch something this hot. Option 2, give it back. Hand it to Richard and pray that was the end of it. But after that note, he wasn't sure he'd walk away alive. Option 3, run. Zeke looked around his tiny apartment. He had nothing to pack. No one to say goodbye to. Maria was gone. Franklin was gone. The school wouldn't even notice he'd left. He stood, stuffing the diamond into his shoe. It pressed against his heel, sharp and unforgiving. Then he grabbed his jacket and stepped into the hallway, and nearly collided with a man in a black suit. Zeke's blood turned to ice. The man smiled. Mr. Carter. Richard Kensington would like a word. The family's secret. The man in the black suit didn't touch Zeke, but his presence was a cage. Cars waiting, he said, nodding toward the sleek black sedan idling at the curb. The windows were tinted dark enough to hide whoever sat inside. Zeke's fingers twitched toward his pocket, where the diamond weighed heavy in its pouch. He could run. Right now, bolt down the alley, and disappear into the maze of the city. But the man's hand rested lightly on something beneath his jacket, the outline of a gun. So Zeke walked. The car door swung open before he reached it. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne. And there, in the back seat, sat Richard Kensington. Up close, Richard looked older than he had at the school. Deep lines cut across his forehead, and his perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the tension in his jaw. He didn't smile. "Ezekiel," he said. "Get in." Zeke hesitated. The man behind him cleared his throat. He got in. The door shut with a soft click, sealing him inside. The car pulled away from the curb, smooth and silent. Richard didn't speak at first. He just studied Zeke, his gaze flicking to his worn shoes, his patched jacket, the way his hands clenched into fists on his knees. Then, quietly, "You have something of mine." Zeke's throat tightened. "Don't know what you're talking about." Richard sighed, like he was disappointed a child had lied to him. He reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. It was old, the edges yellowed. A group of men in suits, standing in front of a museum. Zeke recognized a younger Richard immediately. Taller, leaner, but with the same sharp eyes. Beside him stood an older man, his hand resting on Richard's shoulder. "My father," Richard said, tapping the older man's face. "William Kensington." Zeke didn't respond. Richard's voice dropped. In 1982, 12 diamonds were stolen from the Luanda Museum, the Rose of Angola collection. The police suspected my father. They questioned him for months, but without proof. He trailed off, his thumb brushing over the photograph. He died never admitting a thing. Zeke's pulse thundered. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you found the proof," Richard said. His eyes locked onto Zeke's. "That diamond in your pocket? It was never just about the money. It was about legacy. My father's name. My name." The car turned onto a tree-lined street, mansions looming on either side. Zeke had never been in this part of town before. Richard leaned closer. "Give it back, Ezekiel, and I'll make sure you're taken care of." Zeke knew what that meant. A payoff, a bribe, enough to keep him quiet. But then, the car slowed in front of a wrought iron gate. Beyond it, a sprawling estate stretched out, all manicured lawns and marble fountains. Standing on the steps of the mansion was a woman in a sleek gray dress, her arms crossed. Richard's sister, Eleanor Kensington. Zeke had seen her before, in newspapers at charity events. But in person, she was sharper, her gaze cutting straight through him as the car stopped. Richard didn't move. "Last chance," he murmured. "Walk away with something, or walk away with nothing." Zeke looked down at his hands, rough, scarred from years of work. Hands that had never held anything worth more than the janitor's decision. The velvet pouch felt like it was burning a hole in Zeke's hand as he pulled it from his pocket. Richard's eyes locked onto it instantly, his breath hitching almost imperceptibly. The air in the car grew heavier, thick with anticipation. Zeke hesitated. His fingers tightened around the pouch. For 23 years, he had been invisible, a man who cleaned up after others, who was ignored in hallways, who sat on a broken chair no one else wanted. But right now, for the first time in his life, he held power, and Richard Kensington knew it. A muscle in Richard's jaw twitched. "Be smart, Ezekiel." Outside the car, Eleanor began descending the mansion steps, her heels clicking against stone. Zeke's mind raced. If he handed over the diamond, what then? A payoff? A promise? Or would he end up like Franklin Boyd, another man who knew too much, who disappeared quietly after retiring? But if he refused, he thought of Maria. What would she have told him to do? Real treasure ain't what you hold, Zeke. It's what you do with it. His wife's voice, clear as if she were sitting beside him. Zeke's fingers uncurled. He dropped the pouch into Richard's waiting palm. Richard exhaled, his shoulders relaxing as he weighed the pouch in his hand. Then, with a satisfied nod, he tucked it into his breast pocket. "Good man." The car door unlocked with a quiet thunk. Zeke reached for the handle. "Not so fast," Richard murmured. Zeke froze. Richard wasn't looking at him anymore. He was staring out the window at Eleanor, who had stopped halfway down the path. Her eyes narrowed. "You understand, of course," Richard said slowly, "that this stays between us." It wasn't a request. Zeke nodded. Richard smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Glad we could come to an arrangement." The door clicked open fully this time. Zeke stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the mansion looming over him. Eleanor watched him with cold curiosity as he passed her, but she said nothing. The gate swung shut behind him with a final, echoing clang. 3 blocks away. Zeke didn't realize he was shaking until he had to stop and lean against a bus shelter. His legs threatened to give out beneath him. He had just handed over a $300 million diamond, and Richard had let him walk away. Too easy. The thought slithered through his mind, unwelcome but insistent. Men like Richard Kensington didn't let loose ends wander off. Not when those loose ends could unravel everything. Zeke's hand drifted to his other pocket, the one Richard hadn't checked. His fingers brushed against the brittle edge of the old newspaper clipping from the chair, the one that named William Kensington as a suspect, the one proof Richard didn't know existed. And suddenly, Zeke knew what he had to do. The Daily Chronicle office. The receptionist barely glanced up as Zeke approached. "Can I help you?" "I need to speak to someone about a story," Zeke said. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "A big one." The receptionist sighed, already reaching for a form. "Name?" Zeke hesitated. Then, for the first time in years, he stood a little taller. "Ezekiel Carter. And tell them it's about the Rose of Angola." The journalist. The receptionist at the Daily Chronicle gave Zeke a skeptical once-over, his worn-out shoes, his frayed jacket, the way his hands couldn't seem to stop fidgeting. She sighed through her nose and picked up the phone. "Mr. Carter, to see someone about a story," she said flatly, then pointed down the hall. "3rd door on the left. Don't touch anything." The newsroom was chaos. Phones rang. Keyboards clacked, and reporters shouted over each other. Zeke had never been in a place like this before. He kept his head down and walked fast, shoulders hunched like he was expecting someone to stop him at any second. The third door was half open. Inside, a woman in her late 30s sat behind a desk buried under stacks of paper and empty coffee cups. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, revealing forearms covered in ink smudges and faded freckles. Zeke knocked lightly on the doorframe. The woman looked up, her sharp green eyes scanning him in one quick glance. "You the janitor with the diamond story?" Zeke blinked. "How did you—" "Lucky guess." She leaned back in her chair and gestured for him to sit. "Lena Reyes, investigative reporter. And you're either about to waste my time or make my career. So talk." Zeke sat. His mouth was dry. He reached into his pocket and slid the yellow newspaper clipping across the desk. Lena picked it up, her eyebrows lifting as she read the headline. Then she went very still. "This is from 1982, she said slowly. Zeke nodded. Lena set the clipping down and folded her hands. "Start from the beginning." So he did. He told her about the chair, about Richard Kensington's sudden interest, about the hidden compartment and the diamond inside, about the initials on the pouch, RK, and the way Richard had looked at him in the car, like Zeke was nothing more than a problem to be managed. Lena listened without interrupting. When Zeke finished, she exhaled through her teeth and reached for her laptop. "You realize what you're saying, right?" she said as she typed. "You're accusing one of the most powerful men in the city of being involved in a multi-million-dollar heist." Zeke's stomach nodded. "I know." Lena turned the screen toward him. It showed a scanned police report from 1982, one he'd never seen before. Suspect, William Kensington. Alibi provided by son, Richard Kensington, age 22. Discrepancies noted. Zeke's breath caught. Lena's eyes gleamed. "I've been digging into the Kensingtons for years. They've got their fingers in everything. Real estate, politics, even the damn school board. But I've never had proof." She tapped the newspaper clipping. "Until now." Zeke swallowed hard. "What happens next?" Lena grinned. It wasn't a nice grin. "We ruined them." 2 hours later, Zeke stood in the alley behind the newspaper office, the cold brick wall at his back. Lena had told him to wait there while she made calls, but the longer he stood there, the more his skin prickled with unease. He shouldn't have come here. Richard would find out. He'd know. And then a shadow moved at the mouth of the alley. Zeke tensed, his hand going to the tire iron in his jacket pocket. The shadow stepped into the dim light. It wasn't Richard. It was Eleanor Kensington. She wore a long black coat, her hair pulled into a tight knot at the nape of her neck. In the half-light, she looked eerily like her brother. Same sharp cheekbones, same calculating eyes. But when she spoke, her voice was softer than Zeke expected. "You shouldn't have done that, Mr. Carter." Zeke's fingers tightened around the tire iron. "Done what?" Eleanor sighed. "Spoken to a reporter." She took a step closer. "My brother thinks this is over. But I know men like you don't just walk away." Zeke's pulse pounded in his ears. "What do you want?" Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Then quietly, "I want to help you destroy him. The enemy of my enemy." The alley air turned electric between them. Zeke's grip on the tire iron loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. Eleanor Kensington stood just 3 feet away, her hands visible at her sides, her expression unreadable in the flickering neon glow from the street. "You want to help me?" Zeke's voice was rough with disbelief. "Why?" Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because Richard is going to get us all killed." A car honked somewhere in the distance, the sound slicing through the tension. Zeke studied her face, the tightness around her eyes, the way her fingers flexed at her sides. She wasn't lying. Or, if she was damn good at it. "What are you telling me?" he asked. Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, then stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That diamond wasn't just stolen, Mr. Carter. It was blood money. My father didn't just take it. He betrayed the people he stole it with." She swallowed hard. "And now they're coming back to finish what they started." Zeke's blood ran cold. "Who?" "The Vasquez cartel." The name left her lips like a curse. They've been hunting for those diamonds for decades. And when they find out Richard has won, she didn't need to finish. Zeke could fill in the blanks. He exhaled sharply, his mind racing. This was bigger than he'd thought. Bigger than a simple heist. If the cartel was involved, why come to me, he asked. You could go to the police. The FBI. Eleanor barked a laugh. With what proof? A janitor's story and a newspaper clipping? She shook her head. No, we need irrefutable evidence. Something that ties Richard to the heist and the cartel. Her eyes locked onto his. And I think you know where to find it. Zeke stiffened. What are you talking about? The chair. Eleanor's voice was firm. If my father had one diamond in it, he might have hidden more. Or something else, documents, names, anything. Zeke's thoughts flashed to the janitor's closet at Lincoln High. The chair was still there, waiting. But it's too late, he said. Richard already has people watching it. Eleanor's smile was razor-thin. Then it's a good thing you have me. Lincoln High, midnight. The school was dark, the halls empty. Zeke moved silently, his footsteps muffled by years of practice. Eleanor followed close behind. Her heels swapped for sleek black sneakers, her coat traded for a nondescript hoodie. The janitor's closet door creaked when he opened it. The chair sat where he'd left it, bathed in the pale glow of the emergency exit light. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She pulled a small toolkit from her pocket and knelt beside the chair, her fingers probing the wood with practiced precision. There's another compartment, she murmured after a moment. Here, under the seat. Zeke crouched beside her, watching as she pried open a hidden panel he'd missed. Inside was a single yellowed envelope. Eleanor's hands shook as she opened it. The first thing that fell out was a photograph. A group of men standing in front of a warehouse. Zeke recognized William Kensington immediately, his arm around a younger Richard. But it was the man on William's other side that made Eleanor go rigid. Miguel Vasquez, she whispered, the cartel leader. Beneath the photo was a list, names, dates, amounts, a ledger of payments. And at the bottom, in bold, slashing letters, RK keeps the pink. The rest goes to MV. Double-cross me, and I bury you with the others. Zeke's breath caught. Proof. Eleanor's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Enough to bury Richard and protect us from the cartel. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. They both froze. Then, the closet door burst open. The trap spring shut. The closet door slammed against the wall with a crack like gunfire. Zeke's body reacted before his mind could. He shoved Eleanor sideways, put himself between her and the threat, the tire iron already in his hand. But it wasn't Richard. It wasn't the cartel. Jason Miller, the same smirking senior who'd mocked Zeke's chair days before, stood frozen in the doorway, his phone's flashlight beam darting between them. His mouth hung open, his eyes wide with shock. What the hell? Eleanor moved first. She was on her feet in a flash, the envelope and its damning contents already stuffed into her hoodie pocket. You shouldn't be here, she said, her voice low and dangerous in a way Zeke hadn't heard before. Jason took a step back, but his gaze locked onto the chair. Is that? Are you stealing school property? His voice cracked on the last word, the bravado slipping just enough to reveal the scared kid underneath. Zeke saw the moment Jason recognized him. The way the boy's eyes narrowed, the familiar sneer starting to form. But before Jason could speak, Eleanor was moving again, stepping forward with a predator's grace. Listen carefully, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're going to turn around. You're going to forget you saw us. And if you ever mention this to anyone, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, tucking it into Jason's shirt pocket with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well, let's just say my brother has friends in the police department. Understand? Jason swallowed hard. His fingers twitched toward the money. Then, with a jerky nod, he turned and bolted down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the dark. Zeke let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was too close. Eleanor was already gathering their things. We need to go. Now. The safe house. Eleanor's car, a nondescript gray sedan, wound through the city's backstreets for nearly an hour before finally stopping in front of a rundown apartment building on the south side. Home sweet home, Eleanor muttered as she led Zeke up 3 flights of stairs to a cramped studio apartment. The place was sparse. A fold-out couch, a hot plate, and a laptop set up on a folding table. Newspaper clippings about the Kensington family covered one entire wall. Zeke stared. "You've been planning this for a while." Eleanor didn't answer. She just tossed the envelope onto the table and pulled out her phone. "Lena, we have it. Everything. Meet us at the usual place in 30. She hung up before the reporter could respond. Zeke sank onto the couch, his legs suddenly weak. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. He rubbed his face, trying to process everything. The diamonds, the cartel, the ledger, and now Jason Miller, who might blab to the wrong person at any moment. Eleanor seemed to read his thoughts. "Don't worry about the kid. He'll keep his mouth shut." "How can you be sure?" She pulled a pistol from her waistband and set it on the table with a quiet thud, because people like him always do. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Zeke looked at the gun, then at Eleanor, really looked at her. The hardness in her eyes, the way she carried herself like someone who'd been fighting her whole life. "You're not just doing this to stop Richard," he realized aloud. "This is personal." Eleanor's jaw tightened. For a second, Zeke thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "My mother died in a car accident 2 years after the heist," she said quietly. "The brakes failed. Funny how that only happens to people who ask too many questions." Zeke's stomach twisted. Eleanor picked up the photograph in the envelope, her thumb brushing over her father's face. Richard was always Dad's favorite. He got the Empire. I got a trust fund and a target on my back. She looked up, her eyes blazing. "So yes, Mr. Carter, this is very personal." The laptop pinged. Lena's message flashed on the screen. "Got your package. Running the story at dawn. Stay hidden until then." Eleanor exhaled sharply. "It's done." Zeke should have felt relieved, but as he stared at the gun on the table, all he could think was, dawn was still 6 hours away. And Richard Kensington wasn't the type to go down without a fight. The dawn of justice. The night stretched on, each minute crawling by like an eternity. Zeke sat by the apartment's lone window, watching the first hints of gray bleed into the sky. Dawn was coming. So was the truth. Eleanor hadn't slept either. She paced the length of the tiny room, her phone clutched in her hand, waiting for the call that would confirm the story had gone live. The pistol still lay on the table between them, a silent reminder of what was at stake. Zeke's fingers tapped restlessly against his knee. He thought about Lincoln High, about his chair, about how, in just a few hours, his life might change forever. Or end. Then Eleanor's phone buzzed. She snatched it up, her breath catching as she read the message. Her face broke into a fierce, triumphant grin. "It's up." Zeke scrambled for the laptop. The Daily Chronicle's homepage loaded slowly, but there it was. The headline splashed across the screen in bold, black letters. "Kensington Empire built on stolen blood diamonds. Exclusive evidence ties family to infamous 1982 heist and cartel cover-up." Beneath it was Lena's byline and a photograph of William Kensington standing beside Miguel Vasquez. Eleanor let out a sharp, almost giddy laugh. "We did it!" But Zeke barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on the screen, on the second headline just below the first. Janitor uncovers decades-old secret. How Ezekiel Carter exposed the truth. His name, in print, for the whole world to see. His hands shook. Then the first news alert chimed on Eleanor's phone. Then another, and another. Breaking. FBI raids Kensington Estate. Richard Kensington wanted for questioning. Cartel connection sparks international manhunt. Eleanor's smile faded as she read the last one. She met Zeke's eyes. It's not over yet. 3 days later. The story exploded faster than anyone could have predicted. Richard Kensington vanished hours before the FBI arrived at his mansion, but his face was now on every news channel, every social media feed. The Vasquez cartel issued a statement denying involvement, but Interpol wasn't buying it. And Zeke? Zeke sat in the Daily Chronicle's conference room, blinking under the glare of camera lights as Lena slid a check across the table toward him. "For your exclusive interview," she said, "and your silence until the investigation wraps." The number on the check had a lot of zeros, enough to change everything. Zeke stared at it, then pushed it back. Lena frowned. "It's yours. You earned it." "I don't want money," Zeke said quietly. "I want one thing." Lincoln High School, 1 week later. The students and faculty gathered in the auditorium, murmuring as Principal Hayes stepped up to the podium. "Today, we honor a man who taught us all a lesson in courage," Hayes said, his voice uncharacteristically solemn. Then he gestured to the stage. The curtain lifted. There, displayed on a polished wooden pedestal, was Zeke's old chair, fully restored, its engraving now highlighted in gold. A plaque beneath it read, "The greatest treasures are often overlooked. In honor of Ezekiel Carter, the man who showed us the truth." At the back of the room, Zeke smiled. He didn't need a chair anymore. He had a new job, consulting for the FBI on art and antiquities recovery, and a new life. But most importantly, he had peace. This story proves that heroes come from the unlikeliest places. If Ezekiel Carter's journey inspired you, hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life tales of courage, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done with a diamond? Don't forget to share this story with someone who needs a reminder that ordinary people can change the world.